Welcome to Photography A to Z, where we take all things photography and break them down into bite-sized nuggets just for you. On today's video, we're here to talk to you about aperture priority.
Aperture Priority is a shooting mode available on many digital cameras that allows the photographer to set the aperture while the camera adjusts the shutter speed and ISO to achieve proper exposure. Aperture, which is expressed in f-stops, is the size of the camera's aperture or opening in the lens which lets light enter the camera. A large aperture, smaller f-stop number, creates a larger opening which allows more light to enter the camera, while a smaller aperture is a larger f-stop number, creates a smaller opening which allows less light to enter the camera.
In aperture priority mode, the photographer has control over the aperture while the camera takes care of the shutter speed. So, in order to get your camera into aperture priority mode, you're going to go to your camera dial and you're going to turn and select A or AV if you're using Canon. So this mode is extremely useful for photographers who want to control the depth of field in their images or the amount of the scene that appears in focus. So a larger aperture, so a bigger opening, which is indicated by a smaller f-stop number, will result in a shallow depth of field where only a small portion of the scene is in focus, a very creamy, blurred out background. On the other hand, a smaller aperture, which is a large f-stop number, will result in a deeper depth of field where more of the scene is in focus from the front to the back of the image.
So, aperture priority mode is often used by photographers who want to control the amount of background blur, also known as bokeh, in their images. For example, a portrait photographer may choose to use a large aperture, which is a small f-stop number, somewhere between 1.2 to 5.6, in order to create a soft, blurry background that helps isolate the subject and draw the viewer's attention. Landscape photographers, on the other hand, prefer to use a small aperture, large f-stop number, somewhere between f8 to f22, in order to keep as much of the scene in focus as possible.
So, in addition to controlling the depth of field, aperture priority mode can also be useful for controlling the amount of light in the image. By adjusting the aperture, the photographer can let in more or less light to suit the needs of the scene. So, to get the best exposure with the fastest shutter speed, you would set your dial to the widest aperture, letting in as much light as possible. So, remember, that would be a small f stop number. As you make that opening smaller and you increase that f-stop number, say f22, you have a smaller opening which allows less light in. And what that's going to require of the camera is a slower shutter speed to compensate for the amount of light let in through that smaller opening.
Overall, aperture priority mode is a very useful tool for photographers who want to have more control over the depth of field and light in their images. It allows the photographer to set the aperture while the camera takes care of the rest, allowing the photographer to focus on composition and capturing the moment. It is a very useful mode when you are in a scene where light is often changing. Once you set the aperture, the camera will automatically adjust the shutter speed as the light changes. We use this mode fairly regularly and recommended it to those who are learning photography for the first step away from auto mode.
I agree. I do use this mode probably more than any other mode. And as Warren mentioned, it's really good for situations where the light is changing often or quickly. So we use it a lot in event and wedding photography where the pace of the event is moving very fast. So there's a lot of quick changes in and out of different lighting situations. I personally use it for wildlife photography as well, because again, you get to control that shallow depth of field, really putting the focus on the wildlife. But then again, as that wildlife goes in and out of different lighting situations, you have one less thing to focus on. You're just setting your aperture and letting your camera do the rest. And again, with sports, it's a great mode for sports. One thing that I will recommend, especially if you have quick moving subjects such as wildlife and athletes is that when you choose aperture priority mode, you choose auto ISO. And in doing that, you can also choose to set your minimum shutter speed. So let's say you want to ensure your camera doesn't go below 1/200th of a second, so you get the sharpest shots that you can. Then you would set your minimum shutter speed to 1/200th of a second. And if your camera needed to dip below that to make the proper exposure, what it's going to do, since you have that auto ISO on, it will just adjust the ISO automatically for you.
So what we've included is two examples of aperture priority and how it can impact the same scene and subject. The first one, we have the front foreground subject in focus with a very wide open or low f-stop, and you can see how it isolates the subject from the background. The background is nice and soft and blurry where the foreground subject is in focus. The second image is where the f-stop is taken up to a higher number and where the aperture is smaller. And now you can see that the subject in the foreground is in focus as well as the background, and it allows the viewer to see from front to back of the image.
We hope you enjoyed these videos. Again, we like to make these quick hits so you can pull up the topics you want to learn most about, and get that information fairly quickly and hopefully in an easy to understand way. So we also encourage you, if you can, to visit our photo gallery at 411craft.com. This is where we sell all of our images with proceeds going to feed the hungry.
And we'd love to have you subscribe and join us on this journey of photography A to Z. Until next time, get out there and explore,
create, and do good. Bye.